Hello, good evening. Welcome to panel 4. My name is Pooja Sagar and I head the Word Lab at IIHS, and this panel is titled Evolving Urbanscapes. Now over here in this panel you will see papers which address a range of issues. We will start the panel presentation with a paper on history, then move on to something that focuses on restoration of ecosystems. Then we look at a paper on tradition and culture, and finally we will look at a paper on water mass balance and ecology. I request the panelists to stick to time. You have about 12 minutes. We don't have the last paper, so we may have a few extra minutes for question and answers, and we will take the questions at the end. To all of you, be fearless and articulate, but also be economical with your words. All right? So let's start with Aman, whose paper is looking at Hyderabad, Lessons for Urban Transformation, or Conversation with Hyderabad's Past.
Hi, good afternoon. Today I'll be talking to you about my research on the history of Hyderabad, the history of the restructuring of Hyderabad in the early part of the 20th century, and the lessons that this restructuring holds for cities today. Before I start, I'd like to thank my advisor, Gaurav Garg, who helped me with this research, who's not here today. So the title of my presentation is Lessons for Urban Transitions, a Conversation with Hyderabad's Past. So in July 2024, the government of Telangana established an organization called the Hyderabad Disaster Response and Asset Protection Agency, or HYDRA for short, whose job was to protect public assets like parks and water bodies from encroachments that have happened over its boundaries over time. Organizations like Hydra and other cities are also working towards restructuring cities to make them more climate resilient, and this is quite a considerable task affecting almost every aspect of cities. In this restructuring, authorities do need to be aware of inequalities that are present in the system, that could be reproduced or even worsened through this restructuring. One of Hydra's first projects is the Musi Riverfront Development Project, and this project involves the transformation of the Musi River into a more transformation of the Musi River and its banks into more pretty banks with walking tracks and parks. The government hopes to rejuvenate the polluted river through this project. This is a map of Hyderabad, and I've highlighted the river that is somewhat towards the south of the city now. The ongoing project has required Hydra to carry out quite a lot of demolitions across the banks of the river, and this has obviously affected thousands of residents. Carrying out work to build resilient cities is of course not a modern phenomenon. Cities in the past have also carried out this kind of work, and organizations similar to Hydra have carried out work, especially in Hyderabad too, and to carry out things like to build flood resilience and plague resilience in the city. So studying the work of Hydra and another urban local body, which I will now turn to, can provide valuable lessons for urban practitioners today as we embark on a journey to make cities more resilient. So the organization that I'm talking about is the City Improvement Board, or CIB for short, which was formed in 1912, right after a devastating flood hit the city in 1908, displacing nearly 80,000 residents. A plague also quickly followed in 1911, which also affected quite a large number of people. And the organization was set up to build flood and plague resilience throughout the city. The organization worked for over 3 decades, from 1912 till 1945, carrying out this work. While climate change was not really a concern for the CIB, comparisons can be drawn between the way the board built flood resilience in Hyderabad with the restructuring of cities to adapt to climate change today. So one of the first immediate results of the flood in 1908 was the construction of these two large reservoirs right outside the city. You can see them here to the east of the city. This has led to further problems today, the construction of these two reservoirs, as the water's natural drainage pattern in the area has been blocked by these two large dams. Within the city too, the CIB carried out a lot of work, especially like the construction of a large drainage network throughout the city and the construction of these river embankments that you can see over here, and large gardens with large civic buildings. The CIB also interestingly imposed a ban on the construction of any residential buildings immediately from these banks for about 150 feet, which it said would minimize civilian casualties were another flood to hit. But if you analyze this in a little more detail, it seems as though the CIB had other intentions also, because a small clarification that said houses, quote, costing not less than rupees 10,000 would be allowed to be built over here. And this obviously established a very elite residential space right in the middle of the city along the banks of the river. And although the intention for this buffer zone came from an attempt to make the city more resilient, it was translated into a space that emphasized class boundaries. So a little more detailed archival research also shows that the CIB carried out a lot of other work in the city apart from this drainage network and the construction of these embankments. So much so that they displaced more than around 50,000 people throughout their 30 years of work. And this is already in addition to the 80,000 people displaced by the flood of 1908. And so that's about 12% of Hyderabad's population that was displaced by the CIB. The CIB also intended to rehouse all of these people through a large public housing scheme that it initiated, but until 1945, it only managed to rehouse about 20,000 people. So despite 100 years passing, the government has yet to learn from a lot of the CIB's mistakes. The government today is making a lot of the same mistakes that the CIB did in the early 20th century. The first mistake is where the CIB systematically displaced a large number of people from the banks of the river to impose this buffer zone. Hydra today, like the CIB, is also systematically clearing buildings and imposing this buffer of around 50 meters from the banks of the river. Work has already started on this buffer zone, and the Hydra has already started clearing a lot of buildings and even identified around 9,000 structures that are there along the river banks or even within the riverbed itself. In less than a year, it's acquired around 200 acres of land. It remains, of course, to be seen if this large-scale displacement will again lead to the formation of an elite residential area in the middle of the city. The second mistake that Hydra is again carrying out is not making a body like Hydra accountable to the public. The CIB was protected from accountability because it operated within a non-democratic system. But Hydra, it operates within one, but it's been established in such a way that it's not falling directly under any elected body like the Municipal Corporation of Hyderabad. The government likely foresaw the destruction that Hydra would be carrying out and set it up independent of this elected body, and it has minimal space for public involvement. This, in an ironic attempt to justify Hydra's demolition work on such a large scale, an official even quoted the work that the CIB did, saying, quote, "Even the Nizam had relocated a large number of people after the 1908 floods in view of public health and taken up a Musi beautification project." Building flood resilience today is even more necessary compared to what it was 100 years ago. The Musi floods at least once every decade, the last time being 2020. And these floods are bound to get more frequent and intense over the coming years. While Hydra, in theory, has been set up to tackle an important issue, in reality, its actions like clearing the riverbank of structures seems more oriented towards beautification rather than flood control. Hydra so far has made no formal attempt at strengthening the embankments or carrying out work on stormwater drains throughout the city, both of which the City Improvement Board carried out, or even controlling the discharge of untreated industrial and sewage waste into the river so far. Hydra will not be able to achieve its objective of controlling urban flooding and improve disaster management unless it moves away from focusing on beautification through destruction. So despite differences in political structures within which they operate, both the CIB and Hydra have top-down approaches to urban planning and redevelopment, and both operate largely without public involvement. Hydra has, however, over the last 6 months, faced strong protests in light of its demolition drives. In conclusion, building resilient cities is not a new phenomenon. Displacing many to beautify an area in the name of resilience, like Hydra is doing today, cannot be the way forward. Governments must, of course, ensure that decisions taken to make cities more climate resilient do not reproduce or worsen inequalities and vice versa. In Indian cities, we are seeing programs and schemes that heighten inequalities being repeatedly carried out. Hyderabad's Musi redevelopment project is not just another example. It is both ignoring inequalities already present in the system, but is also repeating mistakes that were made 100 years ago. The movement from a non-democratic to a more democratic system seems to have made little difference other than giving room for some expression of dissent. Thank you.
Thank you, Aman, for that wonderful presentation and leaving us with this thought whether Hydra can learn from CIB's mistakes. So we move on to the next paper. I have Sugandha and Varsha here from the HCL Foundation, and their paper is on revitalizing urban ecosystems, the restoration of barren land into urban mini forest, a home for biodiverse taxa to thrive at Harit Upwan, Amarpur, India. Over to you guys.
Thank you, Pooja. Hello, everybody. I am Sugandha, along with my colleague Varsha Tewatia. We are representing HCL Foundation, under which a program called Harit, we are working towards the environment action. So we are present pan-India, and we have 23 sites across India, where one of the site called Harit Upwan Amarpur, which is present in Uttar Pradesh, Noida, we'll be talking about that. Just a second. So sitting in this room, which is full of experts of the subject who know better than us about urbanization. So it is not a new word for you guys. To set a context for the presentation, India is urbanizing at an unprecedented pace. By 2030, over 40% of Indians are expected to live in cities. While this drives economic growth, rapid and unsustainable urbanization has severe environmental consequences such as biodiversity loss, heat island effect, flooding risk, decline in air quality, water quality, and also affects the public health. These issues highlight the urgent need to integrate nature into our urban landscapes. This surge in population has also negatively impacted green spaces in urban India, which has resulted in a widening gulf between city dwellers and the natural environment. So as I mentioned earlier, Harit is a flagship program for environment action, which is dedicated to conserving, restoring, and enhancing indigenous environmental systems and responding to climate change sustainably through community engagement. We are present in 4 out of 10 biogeographic zones of India. We are partnered with 9 NGOs pan-India. Until date, we have planted 8.5 lakh saplings across India. Our main focus is concentrating on plantation of native species rather than the exotic species. I would like to ask the audience, can you identify the first 3 pictures are of the same plant species and the other 3 are of the different shrub? Can anybody recognize what are these? Yeah, the second one correct is the lantana, and the first one? Prosopis. So we all are very well aware of these 2 species. So our site, the first image shows the aerial view of the site called Amarpur. So Amarpur is a village in Noida, which has this encroached barren land, which was fully dominated by the invasive species, followed by Eupatorium also, and Parthenium. So the first glance of the site was the land is a wasteland. It is not producing any ecosystem services. So taking that in mind, a story of transformation of a barren land dominated with invasive species to a sustainable urban mini forest started. So the second image is the final, which I'll be talking more about how we landed with this image. So the approach was clear. We wanted the growth to be 10 times more, as the first presentation for today also highlighted the Miyawaki forest. Keeping that also in mind, our team concentrated and focused on the techniques to be used for afforestation. So the 3 techniques were traditional, mixed, and dense. We didn't wanted the complete patch of land to be planted with same type of species and the same type of methodology for the afforestation. To reduce the pest attack, to reduce the habitat destruction of the site in case of the excessive grazing happens when the land is handed over to the community. Also, it was ensured that the survival rate should come out to be 90%, and 30 times more dense should be the plantation. The model adopted by IIHS Foundation with most of the partners is a public-private partnership model. So for this particular project, we had 2 NGOs, Say Trees and Green Yatra. So this slide highlights the steps in afforestation, where the pre-plantation activity included floating of RFPs to start working with NGOs which are already working in the field of afforestation and habitat restoration. Meetings were conducted. Meetings with the government as well as the village panchayat was conducted. Initially, they were reluctant. They were afraid to hand over the land to a private entity because they thought that we might take the land away with us and another building might come up. So it was a huge hassle before taking the land. Regular meetings were conducted with the village panchayat. People were taken into confidence. And finally, everybody was convinced and the fencing was done for the site. Followed with, before plantation, it was ensured that the area was cleared of the invasive species. Once the land was cleared, the contours were studied to understand the topography. Before the saplings were planted, manure and natural compost were used for the soil conditioning and the preparation of sapling beds. So to facilitate the livelihood of the nearby nurseries also, it was kept in mind to buy the saplings from the nearby local nurseries only. To retain the soil moisture of the land, straws were collected from the locals and laid on the site post-plantation. So this site was under preparation when COVID happened. So post-COVID, a lot of villagers lost their jobs. So to support their livelihood, we brought in the women of the villages, and till date they are working with us in maintenance of the site. So the site is continuously being monitored and it is being maintained by the community itself. So once the site was developed, the first challenge we faced after the first shower of monsoon was the excess water flow. So the site is divided into 2 phases. I'll just show. So you can see the barren patch and the agricultural fields kind of a patch. So these are 2 phases of the land. So on the phase 2, we experienced excess of waterlogging, due to which we had many casualties also. Most of the saplings in the phase 2 died away. They didn't thrive in the next year. So to tackle this problem, rainwater harvesting structures along with contour bunds and trenches were constructed at both the phases. To support the habitat restoration, bees boxes, insect hotels, and perch towers are also installed in the site. This is last year's picture, where 55,000 species have been 55,000 plants have been planted. 40 plus tree species are there, and both are in phase 1 and phase 2. You can also see we have tried to make the site in various shapes. The plantation has been done in circular and different kind of shapes. This is the list of species, and today we are here.
So for any reforestation site, the job doesn't end at plantation. It's very important to see the impact of that particular site onto the ecosystem that is being surrounded by that. So for that, keeping that in mind, we conducted a biodiversity assessment in the months of May and June. So over this span of these 2 months, we recorded almost 29 species of birds, followed by 11 species of butterflies, damselflies, and dragonflies, and 7 species of mammals, and lastly 2 species of reptiles. In order to capture the nocturnal faunal species also, we deployed some camera traps also. So these are some biodiversity glimpses of the afforestation site. I would bring your attention to the last column. The blue dragonfly that you can see is a blue azure dartlet, and below that there is this Eurasian thickney. So these two species are very unique because these are indicator species of good water source and soil health. These are some highlights from our camera tabs. So we deployed 4 camera tabs and we got almost 5,000 snapshots. So also we work with various communities to develop a sense of belongingness with different activities like nature walks, seed ball making, nest making, and various other plantation activities.
So the rewards of the urban mini forest which we have created in the nearby area of Delhi and Noida are environmental benefits, climate action, biodiversity and social well-being. This also contributes significantly to the SDG goals of sustainable cities, climate action, life on land and partnerships for the goal. So our message will be, let's turn barren dumping lands into heavens of biodiversity. The future of our cities depend on the actions we take today. We would like to thank Excel Tech, Green Yatra, Safe Trees and its foundation team. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Let's move on to the next paper now. Purvi Kumar from London School of Economics and Political Science will present her paper now.
All right. Thank you everyone for being here, and a very good afternoon / early evening to everyone. My name is Purvi and I'm currently a postdoctoral research officer at the London School of Economics. My talk today dates back to the first empirical chapter of my PhD, which I completed in 2023. And my PhD thesis really focused on the reproduction of social hierarchies in everyday life, with a particular focus on caste and gender. So today, for this talk, I picked the first empirical chapter because it focuses on attitudes and the formation of attitudes, and how that ties to the reproduction of hierarchy. But in particular, what are the dimensions of where one lives, and what are the dimensions of some real problems that we find today in discrimination in the urban housing market, that sort of have a role to play when it comes to the reproduction of hierarchies. So to frame this research, if we were to think about traditional attitudes, I think everyone would agree it's safe to say that such beliefs don't exist in a silo or in a vacuum. They tend to reflect a deeply embedded set of norms that have formed over many, many years. And the norms themselves are shaped by a very intricate, set of a cocktail of factors. And then, if you were to think about discrimination, the formation of attitudes, the endorsement of attitudes, can almost precede discriminatory action. And that contributes to the perpetuation of hierarchies. Today, I take as my particular case this perpetuation of caste, gender attitudes, the endorsement of such attitudes, with a particular focus on the expression of discomfort when it comes to who people prefer as their neighbors. So as I've said, there's a very interesting set of relationships here that I want to map out. And I've tried mapping out. It's very exploratory. So I'm also preparing you for a very sort of messy but hopefully interesting set of relationships, right? So we've spoken about traditional attitudes. So let's see what comes into play when we think about the formation of these attitudes, right? One thing, again, that one can assume plays a role are what I call socioeconomic or objective indicators, right? So you think about your own caste, class, gender, marital status, education levels, right? That can shape, or that is associated with perhaps the holding or the endorsement of traditional attitudes. Next, I find this quite interesting, and this to be the contribution in my PhD, is the role of the family, right? How you orient to your family, and sort of how we all have relationships with our families to varying degrees, can also be associated with the formation of traditional attitudes. But then there's this other interesting third relationship, which is your socioeconomic indicators can also shape how you orient to your family, right? So this is, again, an interesting set of relationships that I've tried to map out, and I'll be discussing further when I talk about everything that's at play. So a bit of a dense slide, but my thesis really aimed to contribute to the field of social psychology. And the reason I want to kind of present this is to perhaps give you a sense that in looking at attitudes, social psychology takes sort of a very agentic, positive view of why we endorse attitudes, right? Whereas I think most of us here, at least the Indians in the audience, can say that a lot of the times we endorse, we perform our identities in a way that's not agentic, in a way that is to avoid reputational damage, is in a way to avoid social sanction. Right? So that's largely missing from the literature. The other thing is that when we look at the literature on attitudes in this discipline, it's rather focused on a very narrow view of the family as just the parental unit. Whereas, of course, again, in the Indian context, for the most part, we have a larger looming extended family that can play a role, right? So these add novel dimensions to the study of attitudes and make a case for why India is interesting. So to this end, many thanks to Lokniti CSDS in Delhi, an organization that typically does collects a lot of data on elections, on surveys, but they also have social sciencey stuff where I digged in a bit and found this really interesting study on youth attitudes and preferences, a data set from 2017, where I could select variables that I'd like to use to really disentangle this relationship that I've been speaking about. And the contribution has largely been to social psychology, but also hopefully to the things we're interested in here in this room, right? Which is on themes of urban transitions. So as I said, this was a data set, secondary data set that I got from Lokniti. This was a study that was conducted in April and May 2016 across 19 states in India with a sample size of around 6,000 participants. Again, youth attitudes to the age was between 15 and 34. And again, right, I could decide the variables I wanted. So once it was a bit of an interesting process where I looked at the variables and then I sat down to think about what are the interesting relationships that I'd like to map out. And of course, here again, there were 3 sets of variables that I identified as interesting. You have the socioeconomic indicators, you have some interesting measures of orientation towards one family, and then you have questions on attitudes, right? That can be seen as traditional if one were to look at one end of that spectrum. So again, I'm just going to blaze past this a bit quickly in the interest of time. But socioeconomic indicators, again, we had variables on gender, marital status, household information, what type of area it is, which I think is interesting and relevant here, number of people in the family, dietary preferences, caste, of course, and education levels. Then we had, of course, what I call the mediator variables, right? Because orientation towards one's family isn't really an exogenous socioeconomic indicator. It's kind of in this in-between state. So for today's talk, I'd like to focus on 2 questions that was already available in this data set, which is to what extent do you worry about maintaining family traditions, and to what extent do you worry about your family problems? And then finally, we have the questions on the attitudes, which was, again, collected as a part of this effort. Here, I, again, draw attention to 5 questions, which had to do with, would it cause you discomfort if you had, these people as your neighbors, right? So people who, cook and eat non-vegetarian food, people from another caste, people who drink alcohol, people from another religion, and people in a live-in relationship, okay? So these were the 5 questions I was interested in. For my analysis, I used an approach known as structural equation modeling. Why it proved to be interesting is because it kind of allows statistically for me to be able to explore these multifaceted relationships and provide this sort of map, pretty much like a Spider-Man's web, if you want to imagine. Then you'll see that in a quick second. And of course, we also then are able to collapse some of these variables into something known as a latent construct, which I will maybe blaze past again in the interest of time. So I call the model that I'm talking about today your friendly neighborhood. Extra points to anyone who gets the Spider-Man reference here. But effectively, it has to do with, again, who one has or what preferences you have regarding who you want your neighbors to be. And then, coming to the results, again, looking at this 3-way relationship of socioeconomic indicators and how it relates to discomfort with norm-violating neighbors. You have that, again, another relationship between concern for family obligation and discomfort with neighbors, and the third relationship between, again, these indicators and a concern for family obligation. latent variables. So this is the collapsing that I was talking about, right? So a data set typically offers you some level of observed indicators, right? The questions that a researcher then deemed interesting. Now, I can't go back into the field and say, okay, no, I would measure discomfort in this way, ask these questions, right? It's been given to me. But what I can do is collapse those questions into a latent construct around discomfort with norm-violating neighbors. Now, this is a very subjective choice, right, that I made after looking at the literature. And of course, this unobserved latent construct is somewhere collapsing the 5 variables that the data set provided me. And the coefficients indicate how well the construct is represented by the underlying indicators. I'd say this was reasonably good. This is, again, what I was talking about, Spider-Man's web. I'm not going to bore you with the details. Again, feel free to talk to me in the break if you want to know more. But again, I want to focus on the 3-way relationship, right? Again, we see that when we look at the relationship between the objective indicators and the discomfort with neighbors, all of us can see the stuff in the green is where there's a positive association that is significant. The stuff in the red is a negative association, right? So if we see, for instance, green and female, is that being a woman is positively associated with having discomfort with neighbors who violate such norms. But living in a town or city kind of has the opposite effect, right? So you're more liberal. So you have lower levels of traditional views expressed on these statements. In terms of concern for family obligation and discomfort with neighbors, again, the directionality is as expected. If you're more concerned about family obligations, it is positively associated with greater discomfort having neighbors who violate these preferences. And again, this one is complex. Again, I'm again going to focus on the main aspect of the attitude of interest here. Concern for family obligation in terms of the literature is interesting because it tells you what really feeds into that. A lot of this aligns with expectations, right, in terms of education levels, in terms of where people live and family size. And again, the interesting thing is also associated with dietary preferences, but caste is where things get messy and complex. I'll come to the measurement issues when it comes to this survey at the very end. But coming to, I think, the finding that is probably of relevance to the audience here, which is the discomfort with norm-violating neighbors, right? So we see that is positively associated with a concern for family obligation. Now, while the directionality and significance is reason to kind of be motivated that there may be something here, I have to say that the coefficient size was pretty small, right? So it then brings to questions about measurement, right? Is concern for family obligation adequately measured by the questions asked in the survey? I'm not sure. And we can talk about that in the discussion that follows. But I think what is, again, interesting in the second point is living in a large family is associated with lower levels of discomfort. I think that should be the opposite effect. My bad. So living in a large family is associated with higher levels of discomfort. All right. Living in a city or metro is associated with lower levels of discomfort. Again, we could probably see that prediction, right, holding up in terms of liberalized societies, right? And then, of course, preliminary evidence is suggesting that caste is probably influential. We see that people belonging to the general category as opposed to the SC/ST groups are associated with expressing heightened discomfort with norm-violating neighbors. And then related to caste is dietary preferences. Yeah? We see that holding as well, which is people who are pure vegetarians or only eat eggs are, again, more uncomfortable having neighbors who violate these very traditional Hindu upper caste norms. All right? I think I should be at time, but I'll probably just wrap this up really quickly. Again, right, I again would love to hear your feedback on all of this since this is a new domain, but I don't see much policy addressing this sort of nuanced discrimination and the underpinnings of this when it comes to the housing market. And but then the other question is whether we need to look at a more bottom-up view on things to see that a lot of these phenomena exist in our immediate environment and that we should be sensitized to them. All right, so with that, I will say thank you and leave you with this quote, and thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you, Purvi. I'm sure there are questions about that panel presentation. Thank you. The last presenter is online with us. Ritika, can you come in?
Namaskar, good evening. My name is Ritika. I'm a second year PhD candidate at United Nations University Institute for the Advanced Study of Sustainability, what we call UNIIS Tokyo. And today I'm going to present something on Bodh Gaya, and it's titled as A Political Industrial Ecology of Water in Bodh Gaya, Pre- and Post-World Heritage Comparison. And we'll see how it unfolds. So let me begin with sort of a background or context to my study. And as scholars from Global South, we know that water and allied infrastructure studies in India or elsewhere in Global South are majorly confined to megacities. And in that realm of literature, small and medium-sized towns and cities are undermined not only in theories, but also in urban interventions. Although these towns have been witnessing the issues such as land tenure insecurity, governance failure, spatial segregation, and one of the example we just got it, and all of them really contribute to the infrastructure failure. But I'm going to tell you the story of something more special, because many of these small and medium-sized cities in India, or specifically in South Asia, are, or maybe like Asia per se, are also religious and tourist towns. So apart from all these issues that I have just told you, they are also witnessing this huge influx of tourists, which further aggravate their issues. So I'm going to tell you one of the story of called Bodh Gaya. It is known as the cradle of Buddhism. It is the place where Buddha got enlightened around 2,500 years ago. And in terms of urban structure and governance, it is a small town with around 75,000 population, and it is governed by a municipality, Nagar Parishad, as we see it in terms of Bihar urban governance structure. And the Mahabodhi temple in the town became the World Heritage Site in 2002. And since then, if you see this at this graph, the tourist population has been increasing steadily, except in 2013, and you would be wondering what happened there. So there was a bomb blast in Mahabodhi temple in 2013. So there's the effect you can see, and the impact of COVID is pretty evident between 2019 and 2022. And just to give you a number and hold on that, in this small town, which is majorly agrarian, last year, like, okay, maybe in 2013, I have the number, from 2023, I have the number from there, more than 2.3 million tourists visit this town within a span of a small time, which is like 3 or 4 months called tourist season. It begins at the end of the November and ends in the early March. And there are more than 150 hotels and monasteries in and around the town to cater these tourist influx. So just to give you a sort of land use change map that I did using supervised classification. So you can see between 2001 and 2024, the agricultural land has reduced almost half, and consequently the buildup has increased. And this whole buildup is just, there's not of migration or thing. It's because of the coming of or mushrooming of hotels and monasteries I just told you about. In this background, so my research is to evaluate the impact of tourism on water resource. Firstly, to look at what happened before and after the World Heritage designation. And I'm specifically looking at 2001, pre, and 2019 as post, and later to also situate this whole sort of macro picture of water within socioeconomic inequalities in assessing water infrastructure. So let's begin with how I'm doing it. So I'm using this analytical framework called political industrial ecology. What it does, it helps us to sort of integrate 2 or more given analytical framework. So in this case, I'm using urban metabolism, which treats city as an organism and has established way of quantifying the flows at macro level. So it helps us to identify and quantify the flows, and in this case, I'm doing water. So there are methods which are established, and it is just, you get numbers. But within that micro picture, we also need to look at what is happening at the micro level. And looking at this micropolitics, I'm using urban political ecology as a qualitative method. And in both the method, like in the first, I'm using water mass balance equation. In the second, I conducted semi-structured interviews. So let's first look at water mass balance equation. So it was an equation developed by Canway for Australian cities, so for in context of developed countries, but it got modified by Paul and her colleagues for Bangalore, like the city you guys are sitting in, and it was like the first, it's like first kind of its study she did for Bangalore and tried to quantifying these resources. So I sort of like borrowed that equation from her and modified it for in case of Bodh Gaya, and it helps us to sort of quantify both anthropogenic and natural flows. So for example, precipitation as a natural and anthropogenic as piped water supply into the town, or system loss as like outflow. So this is how I define my water, and I don't want to spend much time, but this is just to show that what are my data sources and how I define certain water categories. So in terms of interviews, I conducted around 33 semi-structured interviews with different stakeholders, including residents, tourism industry, like heads of hotels and monasteries, and local administrations. And these, like, it's across the span of the time I spent in Bodh Gaya, so not commenting on that. Coming to the results, a very exciting part to look at. So we have seen that in my second slide, that how the tourism inflow has increased. So it has almost 700% increase in the last 2 decades. What it has caused that it has increased, and most of this water for the catering of the tourists come from groundwater, so decentralized water supply, which is I defined as a groundwater, also increased. And at the same time, the wastewater as generation has increased almost double. But let me tell you, the town does not, like any small Indian town city, the town does not have any sewerage system, but at the same time the town is using its traditional irrigation system as a sewerage, like sort of taking the wastewater out of the city. So as the traditional irrigation system works on its logic, so the town is facing a lot of water logging issues, and the groundwater seepage has reduced as the piped water supply leakage happened. And I will show you in the consequent slide how and why it has happened. Okay, so coming to the water supply infrastructure, surprisingly, Bodh Gaya got its first water supply back in 1956. Very rare to hear about any Indian city to get sort of, which are not the hub, like
I just want to jump in to say you have 5 minutes, all right?
Yeah. I'm keeping on the time. Thank you. Yeah, so Bodh Gaya got this to connect only 800 households in the town, and as Bodh Gaya is a very important site, so it became the JNNURM city back in 2006, where it got again another piped water supply, which got operationalized in 2017, which aimed to target its 6,000 households. And recently, we know that according in the new dream of Nitish Kumar, Ganga Jal Apurti Yojana, so currently Bodh Gaya is getting its water supply around 80 kilometer away. And these are like using a lift technology of water against the slope, natural slope of the South Bihar. So this is sort of like an overview. Coming to the specific to the years what I'm targeting, 2001 and 2019. And we can see that the piped water supply is not really increased. Rather, given the increase in the household number, it has decreased, though the hand pump and wells remain same. And here in this video, you can see how precarious the water infrastructure is in the town. And there is a strong intersectionality of caste, gender, and water that I found. And in my later part of my PhD, I'm working specifically on this part. And the sanitation part also is also interesting, as there's a quad where one of the elected representative from Bodh Gaya Nagar Parishad said, you gave the toilet to the poor, like to the Mahadalit people, which is a category in Bihar for the most poor people, but you don't have water supply for that. So it's of no use because you really need a lot of water to operationalize those toilets. So that's like an interesting finding. And as I told you, there is an increased leakage in the town, and it's because of the kind of the new centralized water supply, like the new piped water supply that is happening in the town is completely a devastating sort of thing ever could happen to the town. So there are the pipes which are just lying on the road, and now the Ganga Jal, literally the water from the Ganga, is sort of washing the road of Bodh Gaya. Coming to the and concluding to the discussion part, and I have 2 minutes in hand, so let me quickly do it. So even though Bodh Gaya has had water supply since 1956, but the town has yet to had to realize its universal water coverage. There is a sort of multiplicity of the governance, and I've given this example how different stakeholders are operating the town, and nothing is really in the hand of the urban local body. And there's like over abstraction of water by the tourism industry and agriculture, because now the traditional irrigation system does not work. So most the agriculture completely depend on the groundwater, really causing water scarcity to the town. And the most vulnerable to this scarcity is those who cannot access it, the Musahar and the Bunyas community, which actually constitute 35% of the total town's population. And I'll conclude with the general planning and policy recommendation from Bodh Gaya. So what we can learn from there is that we need to account tourist consumption in water and like urban planning, rather than just going through the traditional planning of considering 10% as the float, or 10 or 20% as the floating population. We need to account this whole chunk of the population that comes in town for not only in Bodh Gaya, but other such town in India or elsewhere in the south. Accounting social inequalities, that also some of the panelists also here pointed it out, that we have yet to really look at that part. And and there is need to regulate over abstraction of the groundwater. And what are the recommendations for Bodh Gaya is there is like very strong spatial and social inequality in the town that needs to be addressed. And here's the picture, like people living in these small huts while there are hotels, 5-star hotels all around Bodh Gaya, and like monasteries which are more than a 5-star hotel. In terms of the commenting, lastly, just 2 seconds on the analytical framework that I've used, it actually helped me to look at both macro and micro picture and sort of assess the impact of tourism. Thank you very much. Here is the Mahabodhi temple. I hope many of you have visited the town, so try to look at Bodh Gaya beyond Mahabodhi. And then, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Ritika. All right, so let's, the floor is open to questions now. Maybe I can start off on a question that has come in. I think this is for Purvi. Can this data currently inform leasing behavior in Indian cities? All right, that is homogeneous in norms, behavior, and acceptance.
Sorry, I didn't catch the word. Can it inform the what behavior?
Leasing behavior.
The leasing behavior.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's exactly, hopefully, the relevance of this is that these attitudes are something we all have. So, of course, landlords are people, and I was also informed recently that there's also a lot of this that plays out in the private housing market, where I don't believe they're subject to laws around not discriminating on the basis of identity categories. So 100%, I think this is to say that landlords as well have all this sort of playing on their minds, right? So yeah, I would say yes.
Yeah, I have a question for Purvi as well.
Yeah.
So thanks for the presentation. I'm not sure whether I missed it, but what I wanted to know a little more detail about the 6,000 households that you mentioned. So did you see your findings divided based on the type of household, in the sense that you see these kind of attitudes differ between maybe people living in informal settlements and those living in housing societies, for instance?
Thank you for your question. So this is going to be 6,000 individuals. So the households were fewer in number, but these were participants. So the sampling was at that level. The data I had and the variables that I used were only on the basis of family size. So I had small, medium, and large. And the other categorization, I believe, was village, town, city, and metro. Unfortunately, didn't have consistent, balanced data on the categories that you were referring to. yeah, I can look back at it to see it, but unfortunately didn't have that accessible. But I suspect some of those patterns could have held in the direction that you're maybe speaking about. Yeah.
All right. When you're asking the question, please just introduce yourself. All right. And I just want to add one more question to Purvi because we have some time for the Q&A. You said that living in a large family is associated with lower levels of discomfort, and then you changed that to say higher levels of discomfort. Could you just clarify what you meant?
That was a typo on my slide. So coming from a large family, right? So if you have if your family composition in terms of numbers is higher, was found to be positively associated with expressing greater discomfort with having norm-violating neighbors, right? So let's say that I'm from a family of 7 or 8 people, which was categorized as large as compared to a family of 2 and 3 people. I was more likely, so this is correlation, more likely to have more traditional views towards the types of neighbors that I'd want. Does that make sense? Yep.
Hi, I'm Stuti. I have a question for Purvi as well. So I come from a background of anthropology, so maybe that's where this is coming from.
Yeah.
But I was just a little curious about how exactly it is that you're defining traditional attitudes.
Yeah.
Because, like, to me, it seems like a very broad category to be approaching like the city with. And also, like, even in your evidence, it suggests how among different groups, the idea of tradition is different, right? Like, among like an SC/ST family, maybe some behavior is not deemed to be norm-violating as much as in like a Savarna family. So like how do you define that?
Well, yeah, this was sort of a back and forth process between, because again, right, as an anthropologist and sort of going and observing and collecting your own data through your own observations or interviews, you have the control over the kind of evidence you get. This was sort of flipped on the other side, right, as I looked at this data set and I looked at these questions that sort of, the responses sort of indicated that there was a scale on which, or a spectrum on which you could express how traditionally you kind of behaved, right? So if you had a question like, to what extent, do you experience discomfort having a neighbor who is from a different caste? Not at all, to a lot. So for me, it was the gradation that said something about traditionalism. So that was my very, very simplistic categorization. And as I was mentioning, this was sort of the first chapter of the PhD secondary data, and the rest of my thesis, which only 3 people have read, kinds of clarify some of this where I've had more control. But that's an excellent question. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Please use the mic.
Like you're mentioning about urban futures, right? Like, is it specific to India, or what about the NRI population? Does this kind of behavior reflect there?
Yeah, I mean, I can only give you anecdotal evidence, having been an NRI myself for a few years. I'd expect certain patterns like that to hold, right? There's been some interesting work that looks at, caste, reproduction of caste, and, caste discrimination that happens in the UK. And some hypothesize that these effects are stronger, right? Because there's a greater sense of community. It's amped up in terms of being territorial about your own in-group. But I think that's definitely an avenue for further research. So if you're interested, you must carry that out. Yeah, thank you.
Questions for other panelists? Yes, Gautam? Yeah.
So I have a question for Aman. So Aman, thanks for the presentation. I just wanted to have you reflect a little bit on this idea of learning from the past to the side, right? So in a lot of policy work, the learning is typically horizontal. Models move, best practice move, the contemporaneous. And the push has always been that you learn from the most cutting edge, right? So there's a futuristic kind of temporality to learning, right? The claim to the best and the most modern. So I just wanted to think about what would it take seriously to learn from history? What is the way in which that learning has to be presented, packaged, communicated in the present as not only, look, this has happened before, but this is something that is relevant in the present, right? So how, in a way, do you invoke the past not only as a reminder, but as a very present, current, contemporary thing? is it a question of communication? Is it a question of how does one politically package in a way the lesson? Because some part of contemporary learning is about the politics of who you listen to and who you will not. So what work do we have to do to make history more relevant aside for learning, rather than just a warning, right? Not to repeat in that way.
Yeah, that's a difficult question to answer, but I'll try. So in this respect that I was talking about, where Hydra's work comes in is to make this city and this like riverfront this dream and like this amazing, really beautiful thing that is, like you said, probably coming from the West or some other city, right? But they've captured this dream so tightly that they're unwilling to understand the other aspects that go into this achieving this, and they also don't understand that it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. But that's what I can think of now. It's a very complicated answer and question. So yeah.
I just want to add to what Gautam said. So you've done archival research of CIB, the existing archives, and also looked at the policy papers of Hydra, right? So in Hydra's papers, did you see any self-reflection or understanding of CIB's work, or was it conceptualized as a completely new scheme? Is there some form of self-reflexivity that one can see in these?
So unfortunately for the CIB, they have put out so little information for the public that it's very difficult to do any research. The only research that I've done is from newspaper articles. And even if you go to the Hydra website, it's just links to other newspaper articles. That's all it is. But yeah, it's very difficult to like understand what they're trying to say at all. Yeah.
Can I add to that again, Aman? I thought you made the comment that they tried to rationalize what they were doing, saying that the CIB also did this 100 years ago. Besides that particular thing, are there any other examples of such behavior?
They actually said that at a press conference some time ago, I think in November or December. But other than that, there's been no other mention of it. But a lot of the projects that they're carrying out are exactly the same. Even if you look at the buffer zone, for example, the amount of space that they've given from the banks of the river are completely identical to what the Nizam's CIB had carried out. And they are also carrying it out in exactly the same locations that had happened 100 years ago. So it's very specific to the older part of the city. It doesn't really spread out away from that, at least in the first phase. Maybe in the second and third phases, it will spread out from there.
Okay, there's a question for the HCL Foundation, Sugandha and Varsha. So this is, Charlotte says, are there any conflictual relationships between the different species and the tiny forests? Conflicting relationships, yeah? And also, if there is time, I mean, we do have some time, can you share about the deployment of the night cameras a little bit more?
So as I mentioned that the techniques we adopted were not only of one kind. We had different kind of afforestation techniques at one particular parcel of land, which supported the variety of biodiversity at different patches. So there was no conflict. Till our experience till date, we haven't experienced such kind of conflict. Only there was one incident we recall that there was the killing of a nilgai, but that is also questionable because we don't know by whom was it carried out by. So, but it was not found in the site, it was outside the periphery of the site. So that is only one incident which we have come across. Other than that, there has been no comparisons or no conflicts between these species. First thing, and second thing is, could you please repeat the question?
Yeah, about the deployment of the night cameras.
Yeah, I think Varsha will answer this question.
So camera traps are usually like used to like capture the nocturnal activities and because there are like a lot of faunal species that are active at night. So we deployed almost like 4 camera traps across the site where we like captured around more than like 5,000 snaps, and from them we got really good numbers of mammals like jungle cat and Indian crested porcupine and all. I hope this answers the question.
Also, the camera traps were installed for more than 2 months. Like, so it the battery life of the trap stays for at least 20 days. So we have to also the placement of the camera has to be ensured that it is at the points where there are interactions of the animals. So keeping that in mind, regularly with regular visits, we were ensuring that the camera traps are at particular sites of location in the site, which will actually give us some data regarding the biodiversity. Yeah, thank you.
Could you share a little bit more, perhaps, about public access to the space and how the locals interact, other than what you showed about them helping planting, whether they use the space for recreation or, yeah?
Yeah, I think we missed out like putting up the photo in the slide. But yeah, definitely the site is open for the villagers. Not only for the villagers, but for the nearby communities also. It is open throughout the day. Anybody can visit anytime. Also, they can also conduct their like panchayats or meetings if they want to. So there is no restriction on the land. So it's open for all for the recreational activities. Also, it is a very good source of awareness creation and sensitization of the students of the schools and colleges also. Also, we involve HL Tech volunteers. So that plays a huge role because, I mean, as a ecology student, we see most of the times people working in tech companies don't get an access to these sites, especially in cities. So it plays a very vital role in providing such spaces for them and creating. So for example, I would like to quote last October, there was this wildlife week. First week of October is celebrated as wildlife week. So we conducted various awareness sessions and campaigns and nature walks in the site itself, which was open for the villagers also, as well as for the people of HL Tech. Thank you.
Are there other questions for? Yeah, please pass the mic and just maybe share your name.
So I feel it should be down to top approach. Unless you have an urban local body put in place, you can't have an MLA election. Then you can't have an MP election. There should be something like that. Once you put urban local body or panchayat at the place, no? You make them start activating and you start them, ask them to work. Then later on you go for MP, MLA elections, then you activate that. So all this freezing should happen from top till down. So it should go from bottom to up there, wherein all these agencies try to respond to the same, what I call all the urban problems what they have, because they function on the same locality, right? You have a corporator, you have an MLA on top, you have an MP on top, so looking after the same community. But the system doesn't work like that. So that maybe that approach should start from bottom. So if you take an example of Bangalore, we don't have the corporators for the last 5 years. Maybe most of them are from Bangalore. So that the election has not happened. So there's some legal, what I call legally, it's in the High Court, it's in the government level. So they should not have an access to what you call stop these elections. So that should simultaneously happen. Maybe one election and that's a good concept, which I felt as of now. Thank you.
So the question to that comment is whether you had thought about a bottom-up approach before this.
I myself have not thought of a bottom-up approach, but I can tell you that while an organizational approach is necessary, they also need to take into account what is happening to the people themselves on the ground through all these projects. A more sort of system that includes a public accountability towards the public, as well as some way that the public can be involved in carrying out these projects, would be ideal. Also, I want to try and attempt another answer to Gautam's question, is that if you remember the quote that I had put up, saying that even the Nizam had carried out all of this. It's that the understanding of the CIB right now is just in terms of like the amazing projects it carried out, like the construction of the High Court, the construction of a big hospital, a college, and these huge gardens that almost gave competition to New Delhi, right? Not many people know about the number of people that were displaced by the work, and not many people know about the work that it carried out elsewhere in the city. So like, it's possible that if more people knew about it, more people in the government knew about it, they might not at least quote them, if not stop carrying out these projects. Yeah.
Also, I would like to add one more thing. So for all of our sites, our plan is to keep it for 5 years at least. By the time it is matured, it is self-sustaining, then we plan to hand it over to the public itself. So our motive is just to create an ecosystem, just to create a mini forest, and once it's working on its own, it doesn't need any maintenance, then we hand it over to the government and the public. So that is our final motive.
Okay, so a couple of questions for Ritika. One is, Chintan says, if the toilets are not linked with water supply systems, then I'm assuming that they are either defunct or barely in use. So is that a right assumption? So whether they are working toilets at all. So the second question that they are asking is, what is the approach for water and sanitation planning in cases like Bodh Gaya, which have high level of floating urban population?
Sorry, can you pardon, please? Because there was like some connection issue. I missed on your second question, like high.
So what is the approach for water and sanitation planning in cases like Bodh Gaya, which have high levels of floating urban population?
Okay, thank you. So coming to the first question, like if toilets are not I came from the field very recently. Another interesting finding, before I answer this question, I just highlight that even though some of the Mahadalit households have toilets, but categorically only use them, and men go for open defecation and to just save the cost of maintenance, and that so that the toilet can go longer, right? So that was like really very interesting finding that I want to highlight here. And in terms like, because these Mahadalit tolas, as what we call it because they are segregated places for some other, like for the Musahar communities to live. So and they are actually labeled by the Nagar Parishad as Mahadalit tolas, really do not have any piped water supply because they, or any sort of supply, most of them carry water around 800 meter away or 1,000 meter away, because all of these are situated on not their private land. It's what's the land belonging to a landlord, now gone to the Bihar government. So, this sort of infrastructural arrangement really challenges, if even you get the toilets, you really don't get the water supply, and then you really don't use them. So that was like, first, I hope that was the answer question, like I would able to answer it, because I also missed a part on the question during that. Second question, coming to the flooding population question, like the traditional planning approach really do not account flooding population even for any of the planning for these towns. So at least begin from there. At least try to estimate how many people actually come to your city, whether it is seasonally or all around the year, and make such arrangement that these population can be catered. So if I give you an example from Bodh Gaya, even the government installed piped water supply, but that was categorically meant for households. Even the hotels and monasteries were excluded from such supply. So even if you're not accounting such a huge system in your city, then it doesn't make sense, right? So recognizing it, it's the first sort of step, and then planning it accordingly would be the second step. So second thing that I want to bring you here is there is no public toilet in Bodh Gaya. There's one toilet premises with like complex in Mahabodhi temple, but on the road or anywhere, that's another thing that all my like interviewee mentioned, that we need at least a public toilet, right? So it's so many people come from outside and there's not even a single public toilet on a road for a stretch of so-called urban Bodh Gaya, like on a stretch of 1 kilometer. That's what you call urban. So it's very bleak situation out there for both the tourists as well as for the people who are living there. Thank you. I hope I could answer.
Is there another question? Yeah. One of you will have to ask.
My question is also to Ritika. Really found your presentation very interesting. Thank you for that. My wonder is kind of building up on the second, like the last question that you just answered. I'm thinking of in a city like Bodh Gaya and in our cities in general where water supply is the way it is, like infrastructure is so sparse and it's so patchy, and with the inequalities, like social, like being layered on the social inequalities. I'm interested in understanding, where do you as a researcher like place the tourist? What kind of a claim does the tourist have over a city's infrastructure? And I kind of want you to, like, maybe say a little bit more about what other than the floatingness of a tourist can we use to kind of make that claim. That is one character of the tourist. But what other kind of claim can a tourist make? Because we've heard like a lot of claims to water being made on as a right, as as a service, all of that. But then what does a tourist do? What is your sense as a researcher?
So I don't know, like I'm gonna give you a bit problematic answer to this. So the tourists do not really have, like, they don't need to make certain claims because they just take it up. So these hotels and monasteries, which are give you as a 150, but there are 300 more than 300 out there. And most of the international tourists are captured by monasteries. And if you enter any of these monasteries, they are like 5-star grand hotel. And it seems like West living in the East, just like there's quality right there. So they don't need to make a claim to the water or to the city. They just take from the city and from the right to people that the city holds. So even if you are asking so many people coming in the city and you are branding Incredible India, and if you see most of the time Incredible India is like Buddha sitting there right there, because that gives you an outlook of a secular state and outlook for the global peace, and you know how these brandings tend to work. And you have seen, like, across even Delhi, you have this blissful Bihar always marketing Buddha as one of their main. And if you're asking so many people coming to the city, then the challenge is not looking like, not even considering their sort of their necessities. I mean, like, they are grabbing the water in a sense, I can say that, hotels and monasteries. But even if you're asking so many people coming in there, so the government needs to take some intervention and take some account that if these people have abilities and go deeper into the groundwater and get it, and the other Musar communities or people really do not even have the ability to put a hand pump. So these sort of inequalities are very persisting. So the claim of the tourist on the city, I don't know, like, is it even a concern in the place like Bodh Gaya? It's just like, it's like grabbing strategy that is all the monasteries and hotels are playing out there. And another interesting example I would like to give you. So these monasteries, Buddhist monasteries, and if I give you an example, like Thailand has 11 monasteries in Bodh Gaya, and all of them are like grand. These monasteries also make donations, and majorly they donate hand pumps. So they put the hand pumps in Mahadalit tolas, but most of the time these hand pumps are just like 40 feet or 50 feet. So the water comes only for 2 days or 1 day, or only for a season or for like 3 months, and it goes away. And so one of my interviews said that पानी के लिए नहीं, photo के लिए लगाते हैं. So you see, so it's very challenging. And if you see any of these websites, they're like, oh, we have donated 1,000 hand pumps, we have done this, but for what? I don't know. I mean, I'm into this tussle right now because I'm going to like analyzing the data and writing my thesis, and I'm just, nowhere there, how to just, write all this.
Ritika, I think there's one more question. Is it for, yeah.
I have a question for the folk from HCL.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Rahul.
All right. Not for you, Ritika. Okay.
Yes. I wanted to understand if there was any study done to identify the kind of species that you're introducing to a barren land. There is a lot of impact on, similar to Charlotte's question, there's a lot of impact on the local flora and fauna. For instance, having tall trees in barren lands, it reduces space for large wingspan birds to. So since you were saying that there are future plans as well, maybe consulting a naturalist, and was that done or?
Yeah, so before planting any species, there was a team who actually got on the field and assessed the nearby areas also to understand the ecology of the area, the ecosystem, what kind of species are present there. So when I talk about native species, I'm not talking only about trees, but also herbs and shrubs. So if you have seen in the picture also, it's not a huge patch of running forest. We have left some grasslands, we have left some water conservation structures, we have created some dense forest. Then again, I'm repeating my same point, but again, we have concentrated that the population of the trees in a very different manner. So it is a very cumulative kind of approach where we are concentrating not only on one species, on one shrub, or one herbs. So to ensure that it plays an important ecosystem for every kind of biodiversity if we talk about. So we are keeping that in mind. We have kept that in mind. We're ensuring that they get that habitat over there for the migratory birds also. So that is one of the things. Second is so once our sites are ready, we hand it over. Before that, we always we outsource the project to an agency to conduct the impact assessments. So for example, Grant Thornton, PwC, ENY, their teams will be coming up and they'll be assessing the ecosystem services. Again, if the plantation has been done in a correct manner or not, is it benefiting the local people or not, what will be the provisioning effects of it, supporting effects of it, so all will be considered into it. Yeah, thank you. I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
Okay, all right. I think on that note, we can wind up this panel. We have learned some lessons. Whether or not we can use them for the future is something that we have to see. Thank you, panelists. All of them were wonderful papers. Wish you the best for the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Round of applause for them. Thank you.